Everything all right? Is everything all right?
Yes.
You jumped like something's not right. All right.
No, just thinking whether that microphone is on.
It's on. It's on. It's on. Hare Krishna. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Radha Madhava Kunjabi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabi Hari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Dadi Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jamuna Tiravana Jadi Jamuna Tiravana Jadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Gopi Jana Balabha Girivardhari Jana Balabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Jasodanandana Brajajanaranjana Yamunatiravana Chadi Yamunatiravana Chadi Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Vishnupad Paramahansa Pariviragacharya Astatarasatasi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Gaura Premanandi Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Continuing on our adventure. Krishna says he's adventure. So we're with Krishna, and he is with Uddhava in Dwaraka, as you see in the picture, not a battlefield, but there is some despondency different cause, but Krishna's going to leave, and Uddhava knows it, so he's seeking instructions from Krishna. The essential instruction is how to, the question is how to overcome too much attachment to the bodily conception and family and I and mine conception, so that I can see and understand you correctly. Down a little bit. So we've been hearing some basic Sankhya, the soul and matter and their difference. This nice example of fire that's within wood is different than the wood, the fuel. And similarly, the soul that's in the body is different than the body. As the fire, when it's extinguished, it leaves. We heard this interesting understanding that it enters a subtle state. You can't see it, but it's there because it doesn't, matter's not created or destroyed. That's a Vedic understanding as well as an Einstein understanding. Energy is neither created nor destroyed. Just transformation of state. So, the body is gone and then the soul goes on, so be attached to the soul, not to the body. My dear Uddhava, I have thus explained to you perfect knowledge. There are philosophers, however, who challenge my conclusion. They state that the natural position of the living entity is to engage in fruitive activities, and they see him as the enjoyer of the happiness and unhappiness that accrue from his own work. Karma Mimamsa philosophy, Jaimini, it was present during Krishna's time. It was present during his youth. It's present during this stage too. Karma Mimamsa philosophy. According to this materialistic philosophy, the world, time, the revealed scriptures, and the self are all variegated and eternal, existing as a perpetual flow of transformations. Knowledge, moreover, cannot be one or eternal, this is materialistic philosophy, because it arises from the different and changing forms of objects, semicolon. Thus, knowledge itself is always subject to change. Even if you accept such a philosophy, my dear Uddhava, there will still be perpetual birth, death, old age, and disease, since all living entities must accept a material body, subject to the influence of time. Now we can take it that Karma Mimamsa philosophy was a big deal during Krishna's time, because it comes up at least twice. Here's Bhaktisiddhanta's translation of this verse. My dear Uddhava, I have thus imparted perfect knowledge unto you. There are other philosophers, however, who arrive at a different conclusion. They say that the conditioned souls should engage in fruitive activities because they are the enjoyers of the happiness and unhappiness that are derived from the results of their work. According to this understanding, the cosmic manifestation, including the time, the scriptures, and the souls, are transforming in a perpetual cycle, just as the objects of this world are constantly transforming. So knowledge based on such objects is also impermanent and ever-changing, my dear Uddhava. If this philosophy is accepted, there will be no escape from the cycle of repeated birth and death, accompanied by old age and disease, as the living beings accept material bodies that are subject to the influence of time. Like really just taking it head on. Very explicit. And there's some things in this Jaimini teaching I was not aware of, that they say knowledge is also transient because it's a product of the flowing of things. So there's no knowledge and detachment, it's just attachment. BBT purport. In this verse, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, Lord Krishna speaks the following to Uddhava. Quote, "My dear Uddhava, I have clearly established the actual goal of life in the instructions I have just imparted to you. There are those, however, who challenge my conclusion, especially the followers of Jaimini Kavi. If you are favorable to their understanding and thus do not accept my instructions, then kindly hear the following explanation." And continuing, quote, "According to the followers of Jaimini, the living entity is originally and naturally a performer of fruitive activities, and his happiness and distress are derived from the fruits of his own work. The world in which the living entities find their enjoyment, the time during which they enjoy, the revealed scriptures that explain the means for achieving enjoyment, and the subtle bodies through which the living entities experience enjoyment all exist not only in manifold variety, but also eternally." Whoa. New paragraph, continuing to quote, "The living entity need not develop detachment from material sense gratification, either by seeing the temporariness of individual material objects and situations, or by seeing the material world as an illusory creation, maya. According to such materialistic philosophy, material objects such as garland, sandalwood, or beautiful women are temporary in specific manifestations, but perpetually exist through the natural flow of creation and destruction. In other words, although a particular woman's form is temporary, there will eternally be beautiful women within the material world. Thus, by carefully executing fruitive rituals according to religious scriptures, one can maintain enjoyable contact with women and wealth, life after life. Yay! Perpetual enjoyment. He died. In this way, one's sense gratification will be eternal. In the next paragraph, continuing to quote, "The Jaimini philosophers further say that there never was a time when the world did not exist, as it does today, which implies there is no supreme controller who has created it. They claim that the arrangement of this world is real and appropriate, and thus is not illusory. Phew. Moreover, they say that there is no eternal knowledge of an original perpetual form of the soul. In fact, they say, knowledge arises not only from some absolute truth, but from differences among material objects. Knowledge, therefore, is not eternal and is subject to change. The assumption hidden in this statement is that there is no spirit soul who possesses eternal constant knowledge of a single unchanging reality. Rather, the nature of consciousness or knowledge is that it undergoes constant transformation. They state, however, that eternality is not refuted by perpetually transforming nature of consciousness, by the perpetually transforming nature of consciousness. Consciousness perpetually exists, they say, but not in the same form. Ooh, this sounds like drinking poison. Paragraph. Thus, still it's a quote, the followers of Jaimini conclude that the transformation of knowledge does not negate its eternality. Rather, they state that knowledge eternally exists within the perpetual nature of its transformation. They, therefore, naturally come to the path of regulated sense gratification rather than the path of renunciation. For in the state of mukti, or liberation, living entities would not have any material senses, and thus the transformation of material understanding would not be possible. Such philosophers consider that the achievement of an unchanging state of mukti would stunt or paralyze the natural activity of the living entity, and thus would not be in his self-interest. The path of nivritti, or aiming toward renunciation, and transcendence of the material world is naturally not interesting to such materialistic philosophers. Accepting, for argument's sake, the validity of such materialistic philosophy, one can easily demonstrate that the path of regulated sense gratification brings many unwanted and miserable results to the living entity. Therefore, even from a materialistic viewpoint, detachment is desirable. Material time is divided into different sections, such as days, weeks, months, and years, and by material time, the living entity is repeatedly forced to undergo the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease. That such real miseries occur everywhere throughout the universe is well known, unquote. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. In this way, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur states, Lord Krishna has pointed out the defects of materialistic philosophy to Uddhava. Final paragraph, we may further elaborate that if one falsely accepts the atheistic philosophy Jaimini and his innumerable modern followers, then the living entity perpetually remains entangled in the anguish of birth, death, old age, and disease. The bogus atheistic philosophy encourages material gratification as the only logical goal of life, but the living entity will inevitably commit mistakes in the execution of regulated sense gratification and eventually go to hell. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Krishna, personally tells Uddhava that this materialistic philosophy is false and irrelevant to the actual self-interest of the living entity. Now I'm going to have to take a break and be right back. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama.
Krishna. Okay. Bet you weren't ready for hearing materialistic philosophy in the Bhagavatam class. Here's the commentary by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur as paraphrased or summarized by Bhaktisiddhanta. Lord Krishna says, quote, "My dear Uddhava, in the instructions I have given to you, I clearly indicated the ultimate goal of life. There are those who would not agree with my teachings, however, such as the followers of Jaimini. If you are inclined to accept their materialistic philosophy instead of my instructions, then listen to what I have to say about that." Quote, "According to the philosophy of Jaimini, the living entity is constitutionally the performer of fruitive activities, and such actions are the causes of his happiness and distress. The energy or nature that forms the world we live in, the time under which we are controlled, the revealed scriptures that lead us on the path of advancement, and the subtle bodies that are the medium through which we experience happiness and distress, although constantly being transformed, remain eternally." Paragraph, quote. This is Vishwanath being glossed. "The living being need not renounce sense gratification, either due to understanding the temporary nature of existence or by seeing the world as an illusory creation of Maya. According to such a materialistic philosophy, the objects of this world, even the bodies of beautiful women, are temporary manifestations of eternal nature. Thus, creation, maintenance, and destruction are the three phases of eternal existence. By executing fruitive rituals that are prescribed by the Vedas, one can maintain his aristocratic position, which affords him the possession of women and wealth, birth and death. In this way, one can go on enjoying sense gratification eternally." Continuing, quote, "Such philosophers say that the universe eternally exists in some form or another, and thus imply that there is no need to suppose that there is a God who created it. They claim that the cosmic manifestation is therefore real and not illusory. In this way, they defy the conception of an eternal soul having an eternal spiritual form, which is now covered by matter. They say that knowledge is derived from sense perception and is not coming from some kind of absolute truth, and therefore knowledge itself is subject to change, just as are the objects that it perceives." Final quote, two more quote paragraphs. "In this way, materialistic philosophers conclude that although material nature is unlimitedly transformable, it still exists eternally. By thinking in this way, such persons are more inclined to follow the path of advancing material enjoyment instead of the path of renunciation. They see liberation as a state of pure consciousness without any activity or variety. Indeed, many such philosophers feel that liberation is an abnormal state of existence because the liberated souls would be without any activity or enjoyment. Even if we accept, for the sake of argument," this is still summarizing Vishwanath, "even if we accept for the sake of argument that their philosophy is correct, we would still have to conclude that a path of regulated sense enjoyment would never provide ultimate happiness, but instead would simply award countless miseries. For this reason, even from a materialistic point of view, detachment is in the living being's self-interest. And then here's his actual commentary, which I'm going to skip because we heard it twice. And Jiva Goswami, in his Krama Sandarbha, has a slightly modified translation of the verse and then a very short purport or commentary. O Uddhava, if you consider the varieties of places, time, scriptures, and bodies, as well as the pleasure and pain achieved by the jivas who perform karmas to be eternal, and consider all objects to be naturally permanent and real, with distinct forms and without a temporary nature, then repeated birth will still continue because all jivas are connected with bodies and are subject to the divisions of time. It's a different translation. It's Jiva Goswami. In his commentary, some consider this to be the self, but actually it is the result of the subtle body covering the jiva. It is more and more clear that the instructions are for others, not Uddhava. Uddhava is not an atheist. Sridhar Swami gives an example. The sun, which is an upadhi, transforms into a cloud by the rays of the sun, but it remains at all times. That's the sun. And that's it for this 14, 15, and 16. We're going to cover 17 also. Let me go to 17 because the graphics are going to say the same thing one more time. Okay, here's text 17. Although the performer of fruitive activities desires perpetual happiness, it is clearly observed that materialistic workers are often unhappy and only occasionally satisfied, thus proving that they are not independent or in control of their destiny. When a person is always under the superior control of another, how can he expect any valuable results from his own fruitive actions? Krishna is not approving of this philosophy. Bhaktisiddhanta's translation, although the person who engages in fruitive activities hopes to become eternally happy, it is practically seen that materialists are mostly miserable and only rarely actually satisfied. This proves that the conditioned souls are not independent, nor are they in control of their destiny. When a person is always under someone else's control, how can he expect to get anywhere? By acting independently. Hare Krishna. Okay. BBT purport. Although materialistic persons reject Krishna consciousness and instead pursue temporary sense gratification, even that sense gratification is often beyond their reach. If a person could really control his destiny, why would he create problems for himself? No intelligent person would impose death, old age, and disease upon himself or his loved ones. One should recognize that these unwanted miseries are forced upon one by higher power. Since we are all obviously under superior control, the atheistic philosophy advising one to simply perform fruitive activities and create a happy life is most imperfect. Paragraph. Due to the influence of time, happiness and misery are created. When a woman becomes pregnant, her husband, relatives, and friends eagerly await the birth of the child. As time passes, the child is born, and everyone feels great happiness. But as the child grows into old age and eventually dies, that same passage of time is the cause of suffering. Ignorant persons vainly seek help from scientists who work feverishly, and fruitlessly in their laboratories to stop death. In modern times, inventions have been created to eliminate the inconveniences of life, but the maintenance and production of such conveniences has proved to be unbearably inconvenient. For hundreds of millions of people throughout the world, only the most foolish persons will propose that there is no superior controller, and that one can achieve favorable results by expert performance of material activities. Ultimately, all material activities are useless because they end in annihilation. If one is driving a car but has only limited control, the situation is most dangerous and must lead inevitably to disaster. Similarly, although we are trying to direct the material body to happiness, we are not in full control of the bodily demands, and therefore there will inevitably be disaster, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 9.3. Ashratadana purusha dharmasyasya parantapa aprapyamam nivartante mrityu samsara vartmani. Those who are not faithful on the path of devotional service cannot attain me. O conqueror of foes, but return to birth and death in the material world. Unquote. If one is not a devotee of Lord Krishna, the eventual result of his activities is simply mrityu samsara, repeated birth and death. Just a little bit left. Here, I just read Vishwanath's commentary. It is practically seen that when one performs fruitive activities, he is still under the control of destiny, and thus rarely achieves the fulfillment of his desires. If there was actual freedom, then who would have to suffer miseries? What intelligent person would allow himself to suffer miseries of birth, death, disease, and old age? Therefore, the conclusion is that living entities are dependent upon a higher authority. Thus, he is actually powerless. And finally, Jiva Goswami's Krama Sandarbha. The translation is summarized this way. It can be seen that the performer of karmas is powerless, since he experiences both happiness and suffering. What purushartha would make a person helplessness? Or what purushartha would make a person without control completely dependent? It should make him steady. That's the end for this morning from reading. I think it's going to be an interesting question and answer session this morning. Nice image, some hands offering to the sky. My dear Uddhava, I have thus explained to you perfect knowledge. There are philosophers, however, who challenge my conclusion. They state that the natural position of the living entity is to engage in fruitive activities, and they see him as the enjoyer of happiness and distress that accrue from his own work. Accordingly, according to this materialistic philosophy, the world, time, revealed scriptures, and the self are all variegated and eternal, eternally existing as a perpetual flow of transformation. Knowledge, moreover, cannot be one or eternal, because it arises from the different and changing forms of objects. Thus, knowledge itself is always subject to change. Whew. Even if you accept such a philosophy, my dear Uddhava, there will still be perpetual birth, death, old age, and disease, since all living entities must accept a material body subject to the influence of time. So in case you run into a materialistic philosopher or exponent like this, you'll have some things to say to them. Here are some fruitive workers. Notice up in the upper right corner, there's a money bag painted into this painting over the man's head. He's thinking, I'm doing this to get something. Although the performer of fruitive activities desires perpetual happiness, it is clearly observed that materialistic workers are often unhappy and only occasionally satisfied, thus proving that they are not independent or in control of their destiny. When a person is always under the superior control of another, how can he expect how can he expect any valuable results from his own fruitive actions? Now that's 17. One more from 17. You recognize the picture on the left. That's King Chitraketu's son, Harshashoka, in the baby crib. On the left side, that's Narada and Angira Muni, and the mother by the head of the crib. So the son had died. Due to the influence of time, happiness and misery are created. When a woman becomes pregnant, her husband, relatives, and friends eagerly await the birth of the child. As time passes and the child is born, everyone feels great happiness. But as the child grows into old age and eventually dies, that same passage of time is a cause of suffering. Here's a very interesting painting. Looks like a factory, some kind of a steel factory or something like that, and the workers doing what the workers do in the factory. Over on the right-hand side, people eating abominable things and drinking abominable things, and, you know, looks like it's part of the same painting. Ignorant persons vainly seek help from scientists who work feverishly and fruitlessly in their laboratories to stop death. In modern times, inventions have been created to eliminate the inconveniences of life, but the maintenance and production of such conveniences has proven to be unbearably inconvenient for hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. The working conditions in factories is the point of the illustration. And here's our last slide for this morning. Somebody's driving along a nice rural scene here. Looks like their eyes are closed in the mirror. If one is driving a car but has only limited control, the situation is most dangerous and must lead inevitably to disaster. Similarly, although we are trying to direct the material body to happiness, we are not in full control of the bodily demands, and therefore there will inevitably be disaster. I'm reminded of something that I repeated many, many times because I heard Prabhupada say it many, many times, which is what Krishna is doing with Uddhava, and the opposite is what Jaimini is doing with his followers. One of the primary duties of the spiritual master is to thoroughly instruct the disciple and the abject futility of finding happiness in fruitive activities. I'll say it again because it's nice. One of the primary responsibilities of a spiritual master is to thoroughly instruct a disciple in the abject futility of finding happiness in fruitive activities. And if you hit the delete button with fruitive activities, what's left? People will be gasping for breath. That's life. What comes after life? It's death. So that sounds like death. It's not. It's Maya gone leaves reality. And then one can do full variety of activities with a different consciousness. But to get at that different consciousness, you can't get there by maintaining affinity for finding happiness through fruitive activities. So naturally, Sankhya Yoga leads to Karma Yoga. I mean, that's the structure of Bhagavad Gita. Chapter 2, Sankhya leads to Buddha Yoga, and then Karma Yoga, and then Karma Yoga action. So it's Karma Yoga action and Krishna consciousness. It's a whole big section of Bhagavad Gita, and so naturally it's a whole big section of Uddhava Gita. Sankhya, leading to detached work, not stopping work. Krishna doesn't advocate stopping work. Arjuna wants to stop work, karma sannyas. Krishna says, no. Karma palatyag. So here, this morning's discussion specifically is addressing this particular brand of atheistic. There are other brands, but a very comprehensive picture that says fruitive activities ki jai. And no God, no, whatever you want to think of the soul, it doesn't really matter. Like the discussion of unconsciousness between followers of the Vedas and those that aren't followers of the Vedas, including Buddhists, what to speak of material scientists. And they have a hard time, without going into it too much. It's another class to discuss. Scientists are in fact grappling with the reality that there is consciousness without going into it. It's a field of theoretical science now. Is there or is there not? And there's evidence that there is, but they're hard pressed to say what it is. It's a lively field in modern science. But it's all, there's no need to speculate, is there or isn't there? Everyone's experiencing it. So what's the basis of it? Is it a spiritual or material experience? Anyway, that's another discussion. That's for the Bhaktivedanta Institute folks. Not that it's irrelevant to us, but the focus for this morning is Krishna's saying, the knowledge I've given you is perfect. The knowledge that I've given you points to the perfection of life, not just detachment, but attachment to him, to Krishna, because that's what Uddhava was asking. Now he's not literally wondering, Uddhava, you got something rattling around in there that says you're the materialist and you're an atheistic philosopher. It's not. Obviously, it's not like that. He knows Uddhava. Uddhava knows that he knows that. He's instructing for our benefit. And similarly, Uddhava is asking questions for our benefit. It's his natural humility to inquire and to ask questions that will be beneficial for others. That's a natural characteristic of an elevated soul. So we're benefiting from that. We're only getting started too. This Uddhava Gita is a lot of chapters. We're just getting underway. Okay, let's see if there's some discussion. It's 20 after the hour. Do we have something online? Okay.
Hare Krishna, Guru Maharaj. This morning's class felt quite dense, and I was feeling a little lost.
You're lost?
The
It's so clear. How are you lost? Where's you lost?
Just learned this, the Gemini philosophy. So that is that the fruitive activities will continuously lead us into entanglement, and that is what we're not supposed to focus on.
You've got it. What's confusing? It's an atheistic philosophy, so don't try to like, What's the confusion? Spell your confusion.
So the confusion is that this fruitive activities, we are so attached to it.
Yeah.
The pains and pleasure we feel is due to this attachment.
Yeah.
But because that seems so natural.
Yeah, ingrained. Yeah, it's like easy. Drinking water. What's the problem?
So how much attachment is
appropriate?
Because this attachment, I feel, is also needed, not fruitive activities, but attachment to your family members or people that you're serving. Some attachment has to be
natural. That's not. It's not that you're to trash it. So your question is, what's appropriate? How much is appropriate? And I'll give two answers. The ideal is more than appropriate, it's ideal. And that is attachment in relation to transcendence. Let's, take personalities within the Mahabharata, let's say the Pandavas. They have attachment to one another. They have attachment to Draupadi, they have attachment to, but it's in relation to Krishna. Well, that's, Ramayana. They have relation, the brothers have attachment to each other, and the mothers have attachment to their sons and to the other's sons, and it's completely, absolutely appropriate in relation to, so now the other option for us, we're not these exalted personalities, we got this other kind. So what's appropriate? And the theme is of my answer, the part 2 answer is acceptance and progress. Now this is where I'm at. I want to know what's appropriate, but I can know I'm on the other side of appropriate. So that's the acceptance part. Now, what about the progress part? Let me see what I can do to A and B. Not care less about my family members, but spiritualize the care of my family members. What's that going to look like? Well, we have these examples in Scripture of persons that are there and persons that are progressing to get there. Just like last night. you observe this discussion with Sandipani Muni, and he was attached to his son. He didn't give up attachment to his son, but as he became attached to Krishna, he became, in a different way attached to his son and attached to Krishna. So he went from, it was a fast forward, but it's the principle. So what's appropriate is that you act on a realistic platform. You don't pretend that you have a qualification that you don't have. You accept, this is I'm more than appropriately attached. I'm trying to move to and when does the bell ring? When is it like, okay, now this is appropriate? The bell rings when you're a pure devotee. So it's a journey. And then attachment's going to be there when the bell rings. But it's going to be the kind of attachment that inspires your love for Krishna and your eternal loving service for Krishna and your eternal relationship with Krishna. So for you, what's appropriate is be realistic. This is my level of attachment. And it's more than what's appropriate, more than what's required. Anasaktasya vishayan yatarham upayunjitaha. You know the verse? Yatarham upayunjitaha. Anasaktasya, without attachment. Anasaktasya vishaya, sense enjoyment. Our attachment, material attachment, is my enjoyment. Anasaktasya, without attachment. Yatarham, according to what is appropriate. Your question. According to what is suitable. So what's suitable for you is what you're doing. And that's the acceptance part. And now you're leveraging towards you and your family members, as far as they're making choices as you're making yours. As far as, you try to provide an atmosphere that's conducive to attachment to Krishna within the family. So it's not this, the subject of the morning class is bewildering. It's, you're not sure how to handle the inappropriate affinity or attachment. But, who do you know that doesn't have it? And if you know somebody, then associate with them, because it'll help you get to the appropriate level. Acceptance and progress. We've been speaking about this a lot. Okay.
Maharaj, for the past few days, we've been talking a lot about the soul. So I was wondering, what do the scriptures say about the astral plane?
The astral plane?
Yes.
What does it have to do with the soul?
I mean, I've read in some places that it's like the realm of the soul, but I didn't quite understand.
The astral plane is the realm of the soul? I don't know what books you're reading. Astral plane is the realm of the soul? When I was in college, that was like a cool thing to talk about, astral travel. No one could do it. It was just like a cool thing to talk about. But what it is not defined that I'm aware of. Just, for one adjective is saying subtle. Subtle can mean all kinds of things, but on the subtle realm of the mind, what's that? There's the mind, so that's one of the material elements that covers the conditioned soul. Is there this realm of the mind? I've not read anything that describes that. So it's not the realm of the soul for sure. It's, a subtle way by which subtle things are accomplished. You might find some answer to that in parapsychology. That the mind can move matter remotely. There's experiments by Princeton University researchers. It really disturbed the Princeton University people. But they experimented a lot in parapsychology. And I only know about that because of Satiputta. But astral is, the realm or the energy of the mind and its workings somehow. There's a group of devotees in Gainesville, Florida, that are ardent appreciators of Satiputta. And you could write to them and they may be able to answer your question in terms of what Satiputta has said. What has Satiputta described? What is the astral plane or the astral realm? Prishni, what's her last name? Starts with an S. Satan, Prishni Satan. Send me a note and I'll send you Prishni Satan's contact information if you really want to follow up on it, and you can ask her. Has Satiputta written or spoken anything about astral realm? Next.
Hare Krishna Guru Maharaj.
Whoop.
So
It's possible, you just practice. If Radha can do it, you can do it. And she's just 10 years old.
I hear so many philosophies from different people, and everybody think that this philosophy is the right philosophy. And obviously, like we whatever we read and study, and I belong from Vaishnava family, so I have faith. But
Good.
how can we convince someone that this is the right path?
The most convincing thing is sadachar. If you're a person of good character and you're radiating contentment, you have to be like smiling all the time. Like, I'm happy. But if you're internally happy, if that's your countenance, that's more convincing and compelling than anything. Now, if somebody has another philosophy, you can reason with them, but reason isn't as powerful as achar. Prachar is less powerful. But if you become familiar, then that may also be helpful to some people. Wow, not that you're like a big scholar, because you're not a big scholar, that's not who you are. So not that you're a big scholar, but you understand and explain at a very basic level, an intuitive level, that, for me, you can start like that. This bucket has holes in it over there. And for me, this is wholesome. So I'm going over here. You don't have to say I'm right and you're wrong. You just say this is suited for me. And you accompany that with good behavior, good character. That's good. Now, they may, shake their head and say, no, I have faith in that this bucket's got, it doesn't have holes in it. It carries a lot of water. So,
Thank you, Guru Maharaj. And one more question.
yeah.
What Govind Mohini Mataji asked. Sometimes I feel like all the relations and attachments, and I have so many bad things like pride and envy and so many dirty things, is like the solution is just chanting Maha Mantra and it will get purified, everything.
Well, that's fundamental. Just like these folks back here, they're building the foundation. They're not done yet. Before they put the building up, they're doing the foundation. So chanting is a foundational type of activity. And there's other things that you can do to address, the unwanted stuff. It's a covering, it's not you. And there's a you underneath that covering. So how to remove the covering? That's your question. Get to the real, spirit self. How to move on the path of self-realization and manifesting it. Accompanying the idea of chanting the holy name is the understanding and its fullness of what sadhu sangha is, like what we're doing right now. And there's other, forms and features of sadhu sangha, but being in the company of others who have a similar inclination as you, that is, I'm covered, but I want to move towards uncovered. I want to take shelter of the Supreme Pure to become pure. So in the company of such persons, that will help you overcome the coverings. Specifically in the mood of serving. I mean, hearing from is part of a service, and sharing what Kathayantas chamam nityam turshanti cha ramanti cha. That's the process of overcoming. It's sadhu sangha in that short phrase. That's why we have temples. That's why we're coming together at 7:30 in the morning and having a little class. It's sadhu sangha. Harikatha along with Nama Kirtan. And, in a mood of service. In a mood of serving the name, in a mood of serving the Vaishnavas, in a mood of serving the deity.
Thank you very much.
This question is from Amara Mataji. Certain things that we have to do following the norms of material world to live in this world, for example, education, job, etc. We may also worry about fitting in the mainstream. In this whole situation, we may be losing the sight of our real goal of Krishna consciousness, but still thinking that we are on track. How to understand that what I'm doing for self-preservation is Krishna conscious?
What I'm doing for self-preservation?
Yes.
How does it have to do with, fitting into society? That's not, fitting into society and self-preservation are not the same. So I'm not clear about the question.
The question is how to make sure that what I'm doing for self-preservation is Krishna conscious and not just fitting.
And not just?
Fitting in the mainstream.
Ask Prema Tarangani. That's her mentor, right? But, Guru Sadhu Shastra, And this, same as sadhu sangha. You're in the association of those who you associate with, the sadhu sangha that you've created, or that, Krishna has awarded for you. You discuss this topic with them, and you're continually refined. Start with the assumption that you're a mixed devotee, or you're not yet a pure devotee, and there's some stuff in there that's really, unnecessary and even unwanted, and you do some little, cleaning and eliminating and adding as you go along, focusing on Krishna and letting go of some of the unnecessary or maybe even unwholesome things. And that's sadhu sangha process. The question is how to know whether, so assume it's mixed, and the guideline for all of us is scripture, including Guru and Sadhu, the guideline is scripture. So read Prabhupada's books regularly with the idea of asking through the scripture the very question that you're asking. This very question. How do I know? What's the line between, it's like Govinda Mohini's question, between, attachment and too much, appropriate and inappropriate. Okay, next.
There was a question from Amara Mataji yesterday and we missed it.
Just go to the next one.
Snehavalli Mataji's question. This is from yesterday's class, a clarification question. We know knowledge is vidya, ignorance is avidya. Then how can we describe jnana? Because Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his commentary says that jnanis merge into Paramatma by their jnana arising through their secondary bhakti. Is this jnana pure knowledge?
Well, it's incomplete knowledge. Incomplete knowledge can also be pure knowledge, but not complete.
And my second question is, for jnanis, the knowledge will not cease.
Knowledge will not
Cease.
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 For jnanis, knowledge will not cease.
Because they have not attached their real spiritual identity by merging in impersonal Brahmajyoti. Is that correct?
Well, they haven't attained the fullness of their spiritual identity. That's correct.
And from today's class, the translation of verses 14 to 16 says that knowledge, moreover, cannot be one or eternal because it arises from the different and changing forms of objects. Thus, knowledge itself is always subject to change. This part of Jaimini's philosophy matches with our Krishna conscious principles.
No. That which is real knowledge is not the kind of knowledge spoken of by the Jaimini folks. The Jaimini folks are speaking of knowledge that's arising from Maya. And thus is avidya. From your study of Ishopanishad, that which they think is knowledge is avidya.
This is from Girivaradhari Prabhu. Based on yesterday's discussion, I understood that Guru and disciple relationship is eternal. Does it mean if someone has the shelter of Guru in this life, they had the same shelter in the past life?
I will send Girivaradhari, I will send you, remind me to send you, and I'll send you, Guru is one. It's a Vyasa Puja address that Srila Prabhupada gave to Bhaktisiddhanta in the 1930s, and it answers your question. In essence, the answer, the statement that Prabhupada is making is, he's addressing Guru Tattva, not Guru Jiva.
This is from Uttama Bhakta Prabhu. A householder should not give up work. However, should he try to adjust the work situation where there is harmony among work, sadhana and service?
Why are you asking that question? I mean, the answer is yes, but my question to you then is, why are you asking that question? With something that's so obvious, why is it that you're asking the question? Next.
Shubhra Mataji's question: is it possible to act without philosophy? In other words, if one doesn't follow a divine philosophy, do they not follow manufactured philosophy as the basis of their actions?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Anything else in the room? Okay, let's go to Amara's yesterday question, if it's still there.
Ignoring Krishna manifests in contaminations like envy, anger, etc. What are some examples to understand those activities with which I'm ignoring Krishna?
Material life. Yeah, just, go to any news place and you'll get examples. Hare Krishna. Prabhupada ki jai.